Hi guys, welcome to another Friday Tips with Fens. Alright, what we're going to look at this week is something which affects all of us during our time as an athlete, whether we've just into our training or whether we've been training for many years. And it's quite a frustrating thing when you're caught in it, because obviously we all want to improve in our performances. And what this is breaking through a plateau in performance. Each of us will reach stages in our training lives where we seem to be battering our head against a brick wall and seemingly not progressing, not seeing those new power numbers. And this is very normal. What you generally see within the start of an athlete coming into structured training would be that we'd expect to see some quite significant gains. They could be anywhere from 5 to 20% improvements in performance across multiple time durations, and we're talking power output here. We could also look at times up a climb, give or take the environmental factors, but power is the best way to look at those gains and quantify them perfectly. So after that initial block, that could be 3 months, 6 months, 8 months, we can see those quite significant gains in performance. The athlete's absolutely stoked. They can see they're performing much better. They're beating their mates. They're smashing their Stravas up the hill. Okay, great. Then what can happen is we can hit, as I say, the plateau in performance. And it doesn't matter even if we try to increase too much more training or we increase more intensity, it seems that we're just staying the same. The key here is consistency. In training, that's training, in your weekly fashion and not really missing training sessions. But it's also in trying to look at things that we haven't done, trying to give the body new stimulus to create new adaptations and new change. So, for instance, when we start with an athlete, we may look at a quite traditional periodization model, and we may come in with, a more classical base, build, peak, race type block with more endurance-based SE, strength endurance work, tempo, SST, sweet spot training, threshold, VO2s, more specific anaerobic work and specifics for the target event. Classical build, adding load over time with recovery, perfect for bringing on great adaptation. Once that athlete's been through that process and maybe gone through it a few times, as I say, it can plateau. So what might we do? We might come in with a few curveballs as a coach. I might look at it and say, well, okay, well, look, we find that we default a lot to our tempo and threshold work, but there is a limit to our strength within our anaerobic work capacity. And instead of going in a more traditional method like that, I may come in quite hard with some much harder and much higher intensity workouts. It's a bit of a shock to the system, to the athlete who's used to following a very structured, normalized sort of build. And I may have a couple of weeks of foundation, just a couple of weeks of slightly more endurance work to have enough base to handle a bit of intensity. And then I might throw them into a little block, maybe 10 days, 12 days, 2 weeks of VO2 work, where we're targeting quite a lot of VO2. We're not just going, okay, we're going to do 1 or 2 VO2 sessions that week. We may be looking at doing 3 VO2 sessions in that week, and really focusing on that 10 or 12 days, the VO2 energy system. Bit of a shock to the system, lots of ergos, really mix it up. 3-minute, 4-minute, 5-minute effort, 10-minute absolute frothing at the nostrils type efforts. These are the ones, especially when you're fresh at the beginning of a training program, where your body's in good nick, your systems are all running and all fully charged, that suddenly this added stimulus, this added intensity can bring about a change and adaptation that actually affects you by lifting your threshold to a new level that you tend not to go back to. That becomes the new default. Okay, so that's one way of thinking about changing. We can look at changes and adaptations through increased load. But again, through most athletes, especially working athletes, mums and dads, etc., that can be really difficult to do. If you have a 10 to 12 hours a week availability, by adding another 8 hours onto your schedule, you could see a great change and adaptation. But adding another 8 hours onto your working life, your home life, and everything else would just be a recipe for disaster. So sometimes manipulating it by intensity is a great way to go. Okay, if you're an elite athlete, the gains, the incremental gains get smaller and smaller as we go on. And it can be quite frustrating. Those levels can last for quite a long period of time. Again, I do use the same sort of philosophy. I'll look and see what they've done before. I go back through the data. Have they followed, especially if this is a new athlete to FTP training, have they followed the same pattern time and time again? If so, going to change it. Going to come in with a block periodized model. Hit them, recovery, more recovery. Allow them to absorb that. Hit them again. Okay, those added stimulus can create those small adaptations we're looking for. The 1%ers in the elite athletes that makes a huge difference to whether they get over the climb to be able to sprint, or whether they drop the final attack. They can drop the other GC riders. Often with the elite riders, adding much more volume is not necessarily the way to go, because they're already doing 20 to 30 hour weeks, a lot of these guys, okay? And one of the main reasons that you see Tour de France riders, as obviously they're the best riders in the world, and there's always the term that the Grand Tours will change you as a rider, and absolutely they will, for the very same principles that I've just discussed. A 3-week tour adds a new level of stimulus to that athlete that they've never had before, and what does the body do after it's recovered is it adapts. You might not see, or these guys might not see, an improvement in actual performance in terms of their thresholds or anything like that, but they always say to me they feel stronger than they ever have. And what they may be able to do is produce those PB numbers at the end of a 4 or 5 or 6 hour hard brutal stage, and their economy, the amount of oxygen they use at their muscles, can get better. The body adapts, it changes for the stimulus that we give it, whether we're a beginner to cycling or whether we're an elite athlete reaching for the stars in the Tour de France. Alright guys, look, I hope that helps. For any of you stuck out there on a plateau at the moment, think about what I've just said. See if you've been following the same thing again and again. Add a new stimulus and see if you can create change. Alright guys, I hope to catch you out on the road or trail. Bye bye.